She looked at my perfectly sorted laundry bags, then at the mountain of chaos in front of her, and said, "I've decided you're helping me with these." That was the moment I should have looked away. I didn't. I am not the kind of man who talks to strangers. I am not the kind of man who stays anywhere longer than necessary. I show up, I do the work, I leave. That is how I have operated for the last 11 years as a forensic accountant, and that system has never failed me. Numbers are clean. Numbers are honest. People are neither of those things, and I stopped pretending otherwise a long time ago. My name is Elliot. I work at Hargrove Capital, one of the most respected financial consulting firms in the city. I spend my days pulling apart other people's financial records, finding the lies hiding inside the math, and building airtight cases out of cold hard data. My boss, Mr. Hargrove, built the firm from a single office and one client into something that takes up an entire floor of a downtown building. He is the kind of man who does not raise his voice because he never needs to. I respect him more than almost anyone I have ever worked for. I have seen his daughter's photo on the corner of his desk every single day for 3 years. I never asked about her. That was not my business. So when my apartment washer blew a water intake valve at 5 in the morning on a Tuesday, flooding half my bathroom floor and throwing off my entire schedule by 42 minutes, I was not happy. I had my laundry sorted, bagged, and labeled by category before most people had even turned off their alarm. Darks in one bag, lights in another, delicates separated and placed carefully on top. I do not do anything halfway. I grabbed my bags, drove 3 blocks to the nearest coin laundromat, and sat down in the corner chair next to machine number 14 with my timer running. The place was mostly empty. 2 machines running on the far wall. A television mounted in the corner playing a weather report with the sound off. Fluorescent lights humming just slightly too loud, at a frequency that got behind my back teeth if I let it. I set my timer, pulled out my tablet, and started reviewing a routing analysis I had been working on all week. Everything was under control. Then the bell above the door chimed. She came in carrying a woven plastic basket so overfilled that a blue towel was already hanging halfway off the side. Her dark hair was twisted up in a loose knot at the back of her head, a few strands falling free at the sides. She had a smudge of something that looked like ink on the sleeve of her fitted navy top. Her breathing was short and fast, the way people breathe when they have been fighting something for hours and have not quite won yet. She did not look around the room. She walked straight to the long metal folding table directly in front of my chair and dropped the basket onto it. The sound was loud. A hard plastic crack against the metal surface. Clothes shifted and spilled over the rim. A heavy denim jacket slid off one side. She pressed both palms flat on the edge of the table and stared at the pile like she was deciding whether to sort it or set it on fire. I did not move. I kept my hands on my tablet and watched the structural collapse of her laundry situation play out in real time. She took a long breath. Then she straightened up, turned her head, and looked at me. Not the way a stranger looks at someone sitting nearby. She looked at me the way a person looks at the only other human in the room when they have officially run out of patience for doing things alone. Her eyes were dark, steady, and carrying the specific kind of tired that sleep does not fix. She glanced down at my neatly arranged bags beside the chair. Then she looked back at the disaster in front of her. A small, dry smile crossed her face. "I've decided you're helping me with these," she said. It was not really a question. It was not a demand either. It sat somewhere in between, wrapped in the kind of humor people use when the only other option is falling apart. I should have smiled politely and looked back at my screen. I am aware of that. But something in my hands moved before the logical part of my brain could weigh in. I leaned forward from the chair, reached directly into the center of the pile where a thin fabric strap was knotted around the leg of a pair of dark jeans, and I pulled. I held up a delicate beige item by its strap, level and steady, examining the fabric construction the same way I would examine a line item on a financial audit. Clinical, detached, completely unbothered. There was a beat of total silence. Then she laughed. It was not a polite laugh. It came from somewhere real, warm and full, and it bounced off the metal machines and the hard floor and filled the whole room. It was the kind of laugh that makes a space feel less empty. I set the item carefully on a clean section of the table and began establishing a separate pile. The heavy denim will compromise the delicate fabric if they run in the same cycle, I said. You also risk color bleed from the dark blues if the water temperature is too high. She stared at me for a moment. The laughter faded into something more curious, more attentive. You're serious, she said. I am highly invested in correct categorization, I replied. She tilted her head slightly, like she was recalibrating something. Then she pulled a blue towel from the pile and started sorting. I'm Nora, she said, not looking up. Elliot, I said. She nodded once, still sorting. And something settled into the space between us. Not comfort exactly. Something quieter than that. Something I did not have a formula for. I went back to sorting. So did she. The machines hummed. The fluorescent lights buzzed. And for reasons I could not immediately quantify, I did not look back at my tablet once. I was almost certain the evening was going to end the way all Tuesday evenings ended for me. Quietly, efficiently, alone. Then a piece of paper hit the floor, and everything I thought I knew about the next 30 days of my life turned out to be wrong. We had been sorting for about 10 minutes. Nora worked fast once she had a system, pulling items into piles with the focused energy of someone who had been moving at full speed all day and had not quite figured out how to slow down. She talked a little while she sorted. Not nervous talking, just easy offhand comments. She mentioned that she had been on her feet since before sunrise. She mentioned a vendor call that had gone badly. She mentioned that the basket had been sitting in her car for 4 days because she kept running out of time. I listened. I sorted. I did not ask questions because asking questions opens doors, and I had spent years being very careful about which doors I left open. She pulled a heavy jacket from the bottom of the pile and shook it out. A folded piece of paper flew out of the pocket. It spun once in the air and landed face up on the floor directly next to my boot. I looked down at it before I could stop myself. The letterhead was enough. I know bank stationery the way a doctor knows an X-ray. The weight of the paper, the specific crest at the top, the bold block formatting used for account alerts. My eyes locked onto the key line before I had even made a conscious decision to read it. Account status frozen. Pending fraudulent activity review. Outstanding balance due, $42,500. I picked it up. I held it out to her without a word. Nora turned, saw what I was holding, and the easy warmth that had settled over the last 10 minutes disappeared from her face completely. She crossed the distance between us in 2 steps and took the paper from my hand. Her jaw was tight. I didn't ask you to read that, she said. The typography is designed to cause panic, I said, keeping my voice level. It's a standard automated freeze notice. The bank's algorithm flagged a sequential routing anomaly on your operating account. It's not a personal accusation. It's a system response. She stared at me. How do you know what kind of notice it is from 3 feet away? Because I've seen several hundred of them, I said. I'm a forensic accountant. Something shifted behind her eyes. Not trust. Not yet. But the wall came down 1 inch. She looked at the paper in her hand. Then she folded it twice, very precisely, and pushed it back into the jacket pocket. She did not look at me when she spoke. The bank says my account has been running unauthorized wire transfers to an offshore vendor for the last 3 months, she said. Her voice was steady, but she was gripping the jacket too tightly. They think I'm the one doing it, moving money to hide it. They froze everything this morning. All of it. My operating account, my business savings, the vendor payment reserve. Everything. I waited. If I can't clear the deficit by the end of the month, she continued, they're coming for the equipment, the office lease, everything I built. She finally looked up. I started this company without a single favor, without using one connection that wasn't mine. I built every client relationship from nothing. Her voice did not break, but it came close. And now some algorithm at a bank thinks I'm a criminal. I looked at her for a moment. I ran the logic quickly the way I always do. You didn't authorize the transfers, I said. It was not a guess. It was a conclusion. She frowned. How can you possibly know that? Because someone who is actually moving money offshore to hide it does not do their own laundry at a coin laundromat at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night, I said. They hire people for that. She blinked. Then the corner of her mouth moved. Just barely. Not quite a smile, but close. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out my wallet. I pulled out a business card, matte black with clean white text, and placed it on the edge of the folding table. I set it exactly in the middle, equidistant from both of us. What you have is an audit problem, I said. Someone is spoofing your network, using your credentials to push false payment requests through the bank's automated clearing system. To prove you didn't do it, you need a forensic trace of the IP origin on every transfer. You need to show the bank that the transactions did not come from your network. Nora looked at the card. She did not pick it up. I can't afford a forensic accountant, she said flatly. My accounts are frozen. I'm aware, I said. My apartment washer broke this morning. I'm currently waiting on a replacement part. My evenings are unstructured for the next several days, and I require a problem to maintain focus. I paused. You have a problem. I need coffee brewed to exactly 180 degrees to function in the mornings. You provide the workspace and the coffee. I will trace the transfers and build your case. She looked at the card for a long moment. Then she looked at me. Her expression was unreadable. You sort a stranger's laundry and then offer to fix their bank fraud, she said slowly. And you want coffee in return. Black, I said. 180 degrees. Not 175. She stared at me. I held her gaze without blinking. I did not wait for her to answer. I gathered my sorted laundry, loaded machine number 14, pressed start, and walked back to my chair. I picked up my tablet. I did not look at her again, but I heard her. I heard her pick up the card from the table. The small, quiet sound of thick cardstock lifting off metal. And I heard her exhale, long and slow, like someone who had just made a decision they were not entirely sure about but could not find a reason to walk away from. The machines hummed. The fluorescent lights buzzed. And somewhere in the back of my chest, in a place I usually kept very well organized, something shifted slightly out of its usual position. I did not address it. I opened my routing analysis and went back to work. But I noticed it, and that, in itself, was unusual enough to file away. When my laundry finished, I transferred it to the dryer, set the timer, and returned to my chair. Nora's machines were still running. She had settled into the plastic chair at the far end of the table, her phone in her hand, scrolling without reading. I could tell she was not reading because she had not turned the screen in for minutes. At some point she stopped pretending to scroll and simply sat there, staring at the middle distance. I did not say anything. Neither did she. We sat in the same room, in the same silence, until both our machines finished within 3 minutes of each other. We folded at opposite ends of the table. She drove away first. I drove the 3 blocks back to my apartment with her card number still in my head, because I had looked at it once and I remember numbers without trying to. She didn't call. She didn't text. She left a voicemail at 11:42 p.m. that lasted exactly 47 seconds. Her voice was steady but thin, like a wire pulled too tight. She said one sentence that stayed with me long after the message ended. I thought about it, and I think I need your help. That was all. No, please. No explanation. Just the quiet admission of someone who had spent their whole life not asking for anything. I arrived at her studio office at exactly 6 a.m. The building was a narrow 3-story walk-up on the east side of the city, about a 20-minute drive from my apartment, and 3 blocks from the laundromat, as it turned out. Tucked between a print shop and a florist. The kind of address you earn, not inherit. I noticed that immediately. The sign above the door read Callaway Events in clean, simple lettering. No logo. No flashy branding. Just the name and a promise. The door was already unlocked. Inside, the space smelled like fresh coffee and paper samples. One wall was covered entirely in color swatches, fabric clips, and printed floor plans pinned in neat rows. Client boards, each one labeled with a date and a name. I counted 11 active projects on that wall alone. 11. And she was running every single one of them without a team, without a co-founder, and apparently without a functioning bank account. She was at her desk with a phone pressed to her ear, her free hand pressing 2 fingers to her left temple. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, a single pen tucked behind her ear. She was wearing a plain white shirt with the sleeves pushed up to the elbows, and she looked like she hadn't slept in 2 days. She probably hadn't. I understand that, but the payment portal is being migrated, she was saying, her voice careful and controlled. I just need a 48-hour extension on the delivery hold. A pause. Then quieter. Yes, I understand. Thank you. She ended the call and set the phone down on the desk face down. She didn't slam it. She placed it down slowly, like she was afraid of what would happen if she let herself react honestly. Then she looked up and saw me standing in the doorway with my laptop bag on my shoulder. She didn't say good morning. She said, "You actually came. You left a voicemail," I said. "We agreed to terms." She held my gaze for a moment, and something shifted behind her eyes. Not quite relief. More like the careful loosening of a knot she had been holding for a long time. She stood up, walked to the side counter, and lifted a large cardboard box with both arms. She dropped it onto the desk between us. The impact sent a small cloud of dust into the air and scattered a stack of sticky notes across the surface. She looked at the mess, then at me. "Physical ledgers," she said. "Bank statements going back 14 months. Vendor invoices, payment confirmations, some receipts I photographed and printed because I don't trust cloud storage." She paused. "It's not organized." That was an understatement. I opened the flaps of the box and looked inside. Receipts folded into irregular shapes. Statements paper-clipped to the wrong months. Sticky notes with faded ink that read things like, "Check this and ask Preston," and "Why does this not match?" A full year of a business trying to hold itself together with whatever was available. My jaw tightened. Not at her. At the situation. There was a real business buried inside this box. A serious, functioning operation that had been bleeding quietly for months, while she kept every single plate spinning above her head with no idea the floor beneath her was cracking. "This filing system needs to be rebuilt from the ground up," I said. Her chin came up immediately. "I run this entire company alone. I don't use my father's name to get clients. I don't use his contacts, his connections, or his reputation. Every person on that wall," she pointed at the client boards, "found me because of my work, not his." Her voice was even, but the weight behind it was heavy. This wasn't just about the box. This was about something she had been defending for a long time. I stopped. I looked at the wall of client boards. 11 projects. Clean, precise, detailed. The work of someone who cared deeply about doing things right. I looked back at the box of crumpled receipts, and I understood. She wasn't disorganized because she was careless. She was disorganized because she was doing the work of 4 people alone, pouring everything into the craft of it, running on empty, and still refusing to ask her father for help. I reached into the box without saying another word. I pulled out a crumpled receipt and smoothed it flat against the surface of the desk, pressing each corner down carefully. "I'll need a corner of the workspace near the outlet," I said quietly. She looked at my hands on the receipt. Then she exhaled. It was a slow, quiet sound like a pressure valve releasing just enough to keep the system stable. "I'll get the coffee," she said. She made it without asking me how I took it. She brought it over in a heavy ceramic mug, set it down near my laptop, and went back to her desk without another word. I looked at the mug. The handle was turned to exactly 4 o'clock. I never told her that was the position I needed to reach it without looking away from the screen. She had simply watched me pick up my own mug at the laundromat and noticed where my hand went. I filed that detail away and said nothing. For the next 2 weeks, the studio became my second office. I drove over each morning before she arrived and stayed after she locked up each evening. I mapped 14 months of financial history across 4 linked spreadsheets, cross-referenced every vendor invoice against the bank's outgoing transfer logs, and built a fully encrypted audit trail on my private server. I cataloged every payment, every routing number, every timestamp. The business itself was solid. Her margins were tight but healthy. Her client retention rate was extraordinary for a firm her size. She had built something genuinely impressive, and the more I mapped it, the clearer it became that none of the damage was her fault. I watched her work. Couldn't help it. Between data pulls and log comparisons, I watched her take a call from a bride who had changed her entire venue 3 weeks before the event. Nora didn't flinch. She opened her laptop, pulled up a vendor list, and had 3 alternative venues researched and presented within the hour. She handled a supplier dispute with the kind of calm authority that came from genuine confidence, not performance. She stayed late on a Wednesday reworking a floor plan from scratch because a client's elderly grandmother needed wheelchair clearance she hadn't initially accounted for. She didn't complain about any of it. Not once. She brought coffee at the same time every evening. Always the right temperature. Always in the same mug. Handle at 4 o'clock. I started to suspect she was testing me, seeing if I would acknowledge it. I didn't, but I noticed every single time. Then, on a Thursday evening in the second week, something in the data stopped me cold. I had been running a pattern analysis on the fraudulent vendor invoices, specifically applying Benford's law, a mathematical principle that predicts the natural frequency of leading digits in real financial data. Organic numbers follow a specific logarithmic curve. 4s and 7s appear at a predictable rate. But in Nora's flagged invoices, the 4s and 7s were clustered so heavily they looked like a signature. Not a random error. Not a glitch in the system. A person had built these invoices manually and inserted them into the automated clearing process one by one. The studio was quiet. The city outside the windows had gone still. The only light came from the glow of my screen and the dim lamp above her drafting table across the room. Nora had come over without me hearing her move. She stood at the edge of the desk, holding a fresh mug of coffee, watching the screen. "You've been staring at that same cluster of numbers for 2 hours," she said. "I found the pattern," I said. She set the mug down slowly. "What does that mean?" I turned the screen toward her and pointed to the data. "It means whoever did this made a mistake. They were careful about the transfer amounts. They were careful about the timing. But they weren't careful about the numbers they invented for the invoices. Real financial data has a natural rhythm. These don't." I tapped the screen. "The origin of the transfers is coming from a terminal that was authorized on your account 18 months ago. A dormant access point that was never formally closed." Nora went very still. "18 months ago," she repeated slowly, almost to herself. I watched her face. She already knew the name. She just didn't want to say it yet. "We'll talk about it tomorrow," I said. She nodded once and walked back to her desk. But she didn't go home. She sat down, opened her laptop, and stared at the screen for a long time with her hands flat on the desk, and her jaw set like someone preparing for a conversation they had been dreading for a year and a half. I turned back to my screen and kept working. The answer was almost fully assembled. By morning, I would have everything I needed. I had the name before she said it out loud. I just waited for her to get there herself. She came in the next morning carrying 2 coffees instead of 1. She set mine on the desk, handle at 4 o'clock, sat down across from me, and folded her hands on the surface like she was about to give a statement to someone official. Which, in a way, she was. "Preston Hale," she said. "He was my operations coordinator. He set up most of the vendor accounts when I first launched. He left 18 months ago. We didn't end on bad terms, at least I didn't think so. He just said he wanted to move on." She paused. "I never thought to check his system access after he left. I didn't even know there was a gateway to close." "Most people don't," I said. "That's what he counted on." I turned my screen toward her and walked her through it step by step. Every fraudulent transfer traced back to a dormant administrative token registered to Preston's credentials. He had retained a back-end access point that connected directly to her payment processing system. For 18 months, he had been running automated microtransfers to an offshore vendor account, amounts small enough individually to avoid triggering her bank's primary fraud alert, but collectively large enough to hollow out her operating reserves, until the algorithm finally caught the cumulative volume and flagged the whole account in a single sweep. Nora stared at the screen for a long time without speaking. "He sat across from me at that desk," she said quietly. "He helped me pick the name of this company. He was at the opening." She stopped. Her voice hadn't broken, but it was close to it. Not from grief exactly, but from something harder to name. The specific weight of being deceived by someone you trusted when you had very few people you allowed yourself to trust. The data doesn't lie, I said, not as a comfort, as a fact, as the only solid thing I could offer her that wouldn't break under pressure. She nodded slowly. She reached across the desk and rested her hand flat on the surface beside my laptop. Not grabbing, not reaching for anything, just grounding herself. I kept my hands on the keyboard and let the quiet hold for a moment. Then I told her what came next. I had documented everything. The full chain of digital evidence was compiled and ready. We had enough to clear her account and establish her innocence beyond any reasonable interpretation. All we needed to do was take it to the bank and force them to look at it. She exhaled and straightened in her chair. "Okay," she said. "When do we go?" "Tomorrow morning," I said. But the next morning came with a complication neither of us had anticipated. I was at her studio just after 9, printing the finalized affidavit, when I heard the front door open. Nora was already in the studio. She signed for a certified envelope from the mail carrier, tore it open, and read it standing by the door. I knew from the way she stopped moving that it was bad. She walked over to my desk and set the letter in front of me without a word. I read it. First Fidelity Commercial Bank's legal team was petitioning the court for emergency relief. Due to the unresolved fraud investigation, they intended to file an injunction to freeze all business operations before the end of the business week and initiate foreclosure proceedings on the studio lease to recover the outstanding balance. They weren't going to review the evidence. They wanted to close the case on their terms before the weekend, before she had time to respond. Nora took one step back, then another. Her shoulders met the wall behind her, and she stayed there, both hands pressed flat against the plaster like she needed something solid at her back. Her breathing went shallow and fast. Her eyes were fixed on a point somewhere past the room. I didn't say a word. I stood up, walked to the front door, and turned the deadbolt. The click of it was loud in the silence. I pulled the blinds on the front window. Then I walked back to her. I stopped 2 feet away, close enough to be present, far enough to give her space to breathe. I placed both hands flat on the desk surface beside her, not boxing her in, but creating a boundary between her and the letter, between her and the threat that had just walked through the door in a sealed envelope. "Look at me," I said. Her eyes found mine. "They are using the deadline as a weapon," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "They want you to panic. They want you to call a lawyer you can't afford or liquidate the equipment before the weekends so they can recover the money cleanly without a fight. That is what this letter is designed to make you do." "It's working," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I know," I said. "That's why you're not making any decisions right now." She looked at the letter on the desk. "They have the court on their side, Elliot. We have a folder of data they haven't agreed to look at." "They will look at it," I said. "Because if they don't, I file a complaint with the Federal Financial Regulatory Commission at 8:01 a.m. tomorrow that triggers a full audit of their electronic security protocols. Their own contract, Section 4, Paragraph B, holds the institution liable for unauthorized transfers enabled by their own security failure. They left Preston's access token open. They received the signed termination of authorization and did nothing with it. The negligence is theirs." I held her gaze. "I have every document, every timestamp, every piece of chain of custody evidence compiled and ready. They don't want a federal audit. They will look at it." Nora was quiet for a long moment. The shallow breathing slowed, degree by degree. "What if they don't?" she asked. "Then I make sure they wish they had," I said. Something in her expression shifted. Not a smile. Something quieter than that. Like a person remembering that they are not standing alone. She reached out slowly and placed her hand in mine. Not the way she had gripped the jacket at the laundromat, steadying herself in a moment of shock. This was deliberate, steady, a choice made with full awareness. I closed my fingers around hers. "We have several hours," I said. "Go get your documents. Wear the shoes that make you feel like you own the floor. For the first time all morning, the corner of her mouth moved. She pulled her hand back, straightened her spine, and walked to her desk. I watched her open the bottom drawer, pull out a slim folder she had clearly prepared the night before, and set it on top of her bag with the quiet efficiency of someone who had already decided she was not going to lose. I picked up the affidavit from the printer, slid it into my own folder, and zipped my laptop into my bag. We walked out of the studio together. She locked the door behind us. The city was loud and indifferent around us as we moved down the sidewalk toward the bank. Two people carrying everything they needed to take back what was never supposed to be taken in the first place. Stafford did not offer us water when we sat down. That was the first sign. In my experience, people who offer you water are buying time. People who don't offer you anything have already decided how the meeting ends. He folded his hands on the desk, looked at Nora like she was a problem he had already solved, and said, "Ms. Calloway, the deadline was this morning. I assume you have the certified check." I had been waiting for exactly that sentence. "We don't have a check," I said. Stafford's eyes moved to me slowly, the way people look at someone they haven't decided to take seriously yet. I opened my laptop, turned it around, and slid it across the desk without raising my voice, without leaning forward, without giving him a single thing to read as aggression. I kept my hands flat and my tone even. "My name is Elliot Marsh. I am acting as financial officer for this account. What you are looking at is a complete forensic audit of every disputed transfer on record." He glanced at the screen. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The IP origin of every single fraudulent wire," I continued, "traces back to a terminal registered to a Preston Hale, a former operations coordinator whose digital access your institution failed to revoke, despite receiving a signed termination of authorization 18 months ago. That document was submitted to this branch. It is in your own records." Stafford sat back. "This is an internal matter. A third-party audit does not invalidate a legally established debt." "It is not a third-party audit," I said. "It is a certified forensic log with full chain of custody documentation. And I would like to draw your attention to Section 4, Paragraph B of your own commercial account agreement." I reached into my bag. I placed the bound folder directly on top of his keyboard, not beside it. On top of it, a deliberate choice. I needed him to feel the weight of what I had built. "Inside that folder," I said, "you will find the complete routing trace, the original termination of authorization stamped by this branch, and a fully drafted complaint addressed to the Federal Financial Regulatory Commission. Your institution received legal notice that Preston Hale's access should have been closed. You did not close it. The unauthorized transfers were executed through a security gap your bank created and failed to correct. The negligence is institutional. The liability is yours." The room was very quiet. Stafford looked at the folder. He looked at the laptop screen. I watched his eyes move across the clustering analysis, the flagged routing nodes, the irrefutable sequence of data points that told one clean and undeniable story. I did not look away from him. I kept my eyes on his face, because I needed him to feel that someone in the room understood every number on that screen better than he ever would. "I will need my legal department to review this," he said. His voice had lost its earlier flatness. There was something thinner underneath it now. "You have until 4 o'clock this afternoon," I said. "If the freeze on the operating account is not lifted by then, the complaint is filed at 8:01 tomorrow morning. At that point, your branch faces a federal audit of its electronic security protocols. That audit becomes public record." I stood up. I looked at Nora. This was her moment. I had constructed the argument, laid out every piece of proof, and taken the first shot. But this was her firm, her name on the lease, her inventory sitting in a studio she had built without borrowing a single favor from her father. I had done everything I could do. The rest belonged to her. Nora stood slowly. She did not rush. She did not look rattled. She reached into her bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper, and she placed it on top of my folder with the kind of calm that comes from someone who has already decided they will not be moved. "Those," she said, her voice steady and clear in the silent office, "are the invoices for every vendor contract I lost this week because your freeze made it impossible for me to process a single payment. Flowers, rentals, catering deposits. Every one of those vendors has a clause that allows them to walk if payment is delayed past 48 hours. I lost 4 active event contracts in 3 days because of a security failure your institution created. She leaned forward just slightly, just enough. You will reverse the fraudulent charges. You will lift the freeze today, and you will credit my account for the operational damages your negligence directly caused. If you do not, I will not only file the federal complaint. I will contact every business journalist in this city and hand them a story about how this bank destroyed a small business owner's livelihood over a fraud your own systems enabled. She looked at me. We're done here, Elliot. She walked out of the office. I picked up my laptop, closed it, and followed her without looking back at Stafford. I left the manila folder sitting on his keyboard like a stone he could not lift and could not ignore. The lobby of the bank felt different walking out than it had walking in. The marble floors, the high ceilings, the tellers behind their glass partitions. None of it felt as large as it had an hour ago. Nora pushed through the heavy glass front door and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The afternoon air was cool and carried the faint smell of rain from earlier in the day. She stopped on the top step and exhaled slowly. I stood beside her. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Do you think he'll actually do it? She asked quietly, not looking at me. He already knows he has no choice, I said. The only decision he is making right now is how to explain it to his legal team. She nodded once, like she was filing that away somewhere. We crossed the street to a bench near a small strip of trees that lined the block. The city moved around us. Cars, a delivery truck, 2 people arguing over a parking spot, and none of it touched where we were sitting. I set my bag down at my feet and pulled out my phone. I had set up an automated alert on her account gateway before we walked into the bank. I opened the alert screen and placed the phone face down on the bench between us. Now we waited. Nora picked at the edge of her bracelet. I watched the second hand on the large clock mounted above the bank entrance across the street. For a clock was 43 minutes away. At 4:09, my phone screen lit up. I picked it up. I read the notification once. Then I turned the screen toward her without saying a word. Account status. Active. Hold removed. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Then the sound she made was something I had not heard from her before. Not the sharp, controlled voice she used with vendors. Not the careful tone she kept when she was holding herself together. It was a real sound. Unguarded. A breath that broke in the middle. A laugh that didn't quite finish. She pressed both hands over her face. I sat with her in the quiet, not filling the space with words, because some moments do not need them. The fight was over. The proof had held. The numbers had told the truth, and for once, someone with the power to act on that truth had been forced to listen. When she finally lowered her hands, her eyes were bright. She looked at me for a long moment without saying anything. Then she said, "You actually did it." "We did it," I said. She didn't respond right away. She just looked at me the way people look at something they weren't sure was real until it was sitting right in front of them. The bench was hard. The afternoon was getting cooler. Somewhere behind us, a street vendor was packing up his cart, the metal legs scraping against the pavement. Nora sat with her hands resting in her lap now, no longer gripping anything. That alone told me something. For 2 weeks, every time I had seen her, her hands were gripping something. The edge of a desk, a phone, a stack of papers, a mug. Now they were still. I keep thinking about the moment I dropped my laundry basket in front of a stranger at a coin laundromat. She said. "You didn't drop it," I said. "You placed it with significant force." She laughed. A real one this time, not the polite kind. "I was having the worst day of my year," she said. "And then this man in a perfectly pressed shirt starts sorting my clothes like he's filing a tax return. The structural integrity of your pile was a legitimate concern." "Elliot." She turned to look at me. "I'm trying to tell you something." I stopped. She had a way of doing that. Stopping me mid-logic, pulling me back from the clean-ordered world I lived in and making me sit inside a moment I couldn't calculate my way through. I had noticed it the first night at the laundromat. I had been noticing it every day since. You didn't have to do any of this, she said. You didn't know me. You didn't know me anything. You walked into my studio every morning for 2 weeks and rebuilt my entire financial record from a box of crumpled receipts. And you never once made me feel small for not having it organized. The filing system was genuinely difficult, I said. Elliot.
I'm listening.
She looked down at her hands, then back up at me. Nobody has ever done something like this for me. Not without wanting something in return. Not without making it about my last name. Her last name. That was the part one had been carrying quietly for 2 weeks. I had known Mr. Hargrove's name long before I knew hers. He had hired me 3 years ago based on a referral and a single meeting, and in that meeting he had told me 2 things. He respected people who did the work quietly and well, and he did not tolerate complications in his firm. I had built my entire professional life at Hargrove Capital on those 2 principles. And somewhere between a coin laundromat and a bank manager's office, I had walked straight into the center of both. I had not told Nora that I worked for her father. Not because I was hiding it. Because the moment she told me her last name, the case was already open. The proof was already building. Stopping to explain the professional connection would have cost her time she didn't have. That was what I told myself. But sitting on that bench, I understood that the reason I had not said it was simpler and harder than logic. I didn't want her to wonder about my reasons. I didn't want her to look at me and ask if I helped her because of who her father was. She deserved to know. Now, before anything else. Nora, I said, there's something I need to tell you. She went very still. I work at Hargrove Capital, I said. Your father is my employer. I recognized your last name at the laundromat. I didn't say anything because the case needed to move quickly, and I told myself the connection wasn't relevant to the work. But it was relevant to you, and you should have known it from the start. The silence between us was different from all the other silences we had shared. Those had been comfortable, working silences, the kind 2 people fall into when they understand each other without needing to explain. This one had weight. She looked straight ahead at the street. Did he ask you to help me? She said. No, I said. He doesn't know. I met you by accident at a laundromat at 9 at night. He was not involved. She was quiet for another moment. The whole reason I built my firm separately, she said slowly, was so that nothing I had could be traced back to him.
No clients.
No contacts. No favors. I wanted one thing in my life that was completely mine. She paused. And then the person who saved it turns out to work for him. I know how that sounds, I said. Do you? She turned to look at me. Her expression was not angry. It was something more complicated than anger. It was the face of someone recalculating something they thought they had already solved. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like the one clean thing I built just got tangled up in his world again. Even if you didn't mean it that way. I did not argue with her. She was not wrong to feel it. I sat with what she said and let it stand. After a long moment, she spoke again. Did you help me because of him? I helped you, I said. Because a bank was using intimidation tactics to steal a building from someone who did not deserve to lose it. And because the math was wrong. And because I stopped. Because what? I looked at her. Because I couldn't not. She held my gaze for a long time. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then turned it face down on the bench without reading it. That was her answer to whoever was on the other end. She was staying in this moment. I have to talk to my father, she said finally. I know. And you probably have to talk to him too. I know that as well. She stood up from the bench. I stood with her. The city was getting louder around us as the afternoon pushed toward evening. More people, more movement, the whole machine of the day running forward. She picked up her bag and looked at me one last time. I don't regret any of it, she said quietly. I just need a day. She walked away down the street. I watched her go. Then I drove back to my apartment, took the long route without thinking about why, and sat at my desk for a long time without opening a single file. The next morning I was at my desk at Hargrove Capital when Mr. Hargrove's assistant appeared at my office door at 8:45 and told me he wanted to see me. I closed my laptop. I straightened my jacket. I walked down the hall to his corner office, and when I stepped inside, he was standing at the window with his back to me, looking out over the city. He let the silence run for nearly a full minute before he spoke. "Close the door," he said. I did. He turned around. He looked at me the same way he had looked at me in our very first meeting 3 years ago. Steady, precise, measuring the distance between what a person says and what they actually mean. "Did you take this on because she is my daughter?" he said. "No," I said. "I didn't know who she was when I agreed to help her. I met her at a laundromat. She had a bank freeze notice and a box of disordered receipts. I had an unstructured evening and a specific skill set." He was quiet. "By the time I understood the connection," I said, "the case was already built. I made the decision to see it through because the proof was real, and walking away would have meant letting an innocent person lose everything she built." Another silence. Longer this time. He nodded once. "Get back to work," he said. I turned to leave. "Marsh." I stopped. "She built that firm herself," he said. "I offered her resources 4 times. She refused every time." He paused. "She doesn't accept help from people she doesn't trust." He didn't say anything after that. He turned back to the window. I walked out and closed the door behind me. 3 days passed. I did not contact Nora. I gave her the space she asked for and spent the time finishing the formal audit report, organizing every document into a clean, permanent file she could use if the bank or Preston Hale ever became a problem again. On the 4th day, she walked into my office. She was carrying a ceramic mug and a small leather notebook. She set the mug on my desk. The handle was turned to exactly 4 o'clock. I looked up at her. She opened the notebook to the first page and turned it toward me. Written in her handwriting, not printed, not typed, but handwritten in her own looping script, was a single line. "Partner, if you want it." I looked at the page for a moment. Then I looked at her. "This isn't a charity offer," she said. "My firm handles events. You handle numbers. Together we can offer clients something neither of us can offer alone. It's a practical arrangement." "Is it only practical?" I asked. She smiled. "The real one. The one I first heard in the laundromat when I held up her laundry with the same focus I would give a spreadsheet." "No," she said. "It isn't only practical." I stood up. I closed the distance between us slowly, giving her every opportunity to say something, to add a condition, to qualify what she meant. She didn't say a word. She held her ground and looked at me with complete steadiness. No reservation, no hesitation, just a person who had made a decision and was standing inside it. I reached out and took her hand. Not to stabilize her this time. Not as a grounding wire. Simply because I wanted to. She held on. "Okay," I said. "Okay," she said. Outside the window, the city moved on without us, loud and indifferent and full of noise. Inside that office, everything was very quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty. The kind that feels like something finally, completely settled into place.